Hey guys, welcome to Joe Knows. So glad that again you're taking the time to listen into this. And I'm doing a little series in Joe Knows this summer called Against the Grain. And against the grain means you're going to have to go against what seems normative. You're not going to be with the crowd. You're going to be doing things a little bit differently. And the scriptures talk about going against the grain. And so what I'd like to talk about today is um, how to go up, how to be lifted up, how to experience where you're actually exalted. And a paradox is something that doesn't seem to make sense. So paradoxes involve going against the grain. In the scriptures, it says if you want to be lifted up, then you have to go down. But if you try to lift yourself up, you end up not being exalted, being put down. Here's the scripture. It says, he who humbles himself, who goes down, is exalted, is lifted up before man. He who exalts himself, who lifts himself up, will be humbled. And we're not talking about humility, we're talking about humiliation. So when you try and lift yourself up, you end up humiliating yourself. But when you put yourself down, and I'm not talking about talking negative about yourself, when you humble yourself, then you'll be lifted up. So I want to tell you a story back to I remember this has happened to me a whole lot, but the first time it happened, I can remember, it was in a football game. It was my senior year. I was expecting a great season, and I had my preseason game, the last preseason game, we called them scrimmages. I just was in the best shape of my life. I was a senior in high school. We had a scrimmage. I scored a touchdown to end the game on the last play. I returned a punt for a touchdown, and we won the game, and something terrible happened after that. It wasn't an injury, I got an infection in my leg, and I actually missed the first game, and I was sick to my stomach over it. I was a very serious high school football player, and missing that first game killed me. I had to have stitches, I had to have the infection cut out of my leg, and I couldn't play the first game. And now I came back for the second game, and it was, I think it was the first half, and they called a play that went to me, and I remember it was a reverse. So everyone on the team, they handed the ball to a running back, and the running back started going right, but I was coming around, and as he went right, he handed me the ball, and I went left. And I remember as I turned upfield, I had opening. There was a guy in my way, and I juked him and cut around him, and I ran all the way into the end zone for about a 65-yard touchdown. Now, I will tell you this. I can remember as I was running, as I saw there was nothing between me and the end zone, no people, and I was running into the end zone. I remember thinking in my mind, I was 18 years old, that's a long time ago. I remember thinking, wow, am I a great football player? And man, I'm going to have a great year, and boy, I am really good. And I got into the end zone, and I turned around. I acted like I'd been there before, but I was so filled with pride. And I just remember flipping the ball to the referee and saying, man, am I great? And I wasn't actually doing this, but I had this, I was patting myself on the back because I was a great football player in my mind. But I noticed that no one on the team was coming to congratulate me. Usually you score a touchdown, the team runs down, you're jumping around, they jump all over you. None of that was happening. In fact, they were all staying down on the other side of the field, and their heads were down as they were walking back into the huddle. I was like, what in the world is going on? It seems that the referee had dropped a flag. A flag indicates there was a penalty, and the guy that I deked around, actually, maybe I did deke around him, but he was blocked in the back, and that touchdown never really happened. It was called back. And I remember knowing, now listen, I was 17 years old at the time. I remember thinking, God just humbled me because of my pride. Now, I didn't even know God at that point. I knew about him, okay, a little bit about him, not much. But I remember saying, oh my gosh, And believe it or not, I have had that experience in my life at other times. Now, I'm going to embarrass myself here, but I'm going to tell you the truth. There have been times that I have preached a sermon. And as I walked off the stage, sometimes even while I was preaching it, my hand came out again and I began to do the same thing I did on that football field, to say, wow. Students, maybe when I was a youth pastor, students were laughing. I saw they were eating out of my hand, and I began to talk, to think about what a great pastor I was, what a great speaker I was, and even as a pastor, after I was a youth pastor. And I can tell you this, that every time I have exalted myself, very shortly, it's almost comical, I have had a penalty flag thrown down somehow, some way, whether it was a little flag or whether it, and all of a sudden I felt like I was being humbled. So this paradox in the Bible has to do with when we try to lift ourselves up, we end up putting ourselves down. But when we will voluntarily humble ourselves, then God will actually lift us up. So I want you to think about that as you go through life. These paradoxes are things that they are true. They don't seem to be true. Who would think that the way to go up, if you want to be esteemed and looked up to, then stop lifting yourself up. Learn to humble yourself. Now Jesus did this for us. In fact, his whole life was an exercise of humility. I want you to think about it. Jesus was in heaven. Jesus is God, was God, always was, but he humbled himself by taking on the form of a man. He actually took on the form of an embryo and was placed in the belly of a 16-year-old girl named Mary. She was a virgin. That is a humbling place to be. I can imagine being in heaven with all of its beauty and then ending up in the womb of a 16-year-old girl. He humbled himself. He became a man. There are so many things that Jesus did and to humble himself. And maybe the greatest thing Jesus did for us to see it was something that happened toward the end of his earthly life. There was a meal, a supper, and it was the Last Supper. Last Supper because he had spent 3 years ministering with his disciples, and he did some great things. And in their minds, he was the greatest. Jesus was the greatest. But he wanted them to understand that the path to becoming great was through humbling or serving other people. So at this Last Supper, right before Jesus went to the cross, as they sat down for the meal, Jesus got a basin, a wash basin, and there was probably some kind of a towel that was in it, and he washed the feet of his 12 disciples. Now Jesus was the leader, he was the great one, but he washed his disciples' feet. And Peter, one of the ones that struggled to lift himself up. Peter always wanted to be the best. He thought he was the greatest. He said, Jesus, I can't let you wash my feet. And because, you being the great one that you are. And Jesus said, listen, you just let me do this. What Jesus was teaching his followers was how to become great. And you become great when you kneel down and you wash the feet. That's probably the greatest act of servanthood in that day, is to wash someone's feet. And Jesus did that. And then Jesus said, I'm teaching you something, that the greatest among you is the one who serves. You see, I'm going to give you a statement now. I want you to remember this. But you got to let it sink in. Serving others is not the road to greatness. It's not the road to greatness. So in other words, what I mean is, you're saying to become great, you serve. Exactly. But it's not the road to greatness. It's the essence of greatness. So if you're serving others to be lifted up and be great, then you see it as the road to greatness. So you're going to serve others until you get lifted up, and then you stop serving them and let people serve you. But serving is not the road to greatness, it's the essence of greatness. So the moment a person ceases to serve, they cease to be great. So Jesus taught us that living a lifetime of serving other people will cause us to be lifted up in the eyes of people, but more importantly, in the eyes of God. So if you exalt yourself, you'll be humbled. But if you and I will live a life of serving others, if we humble ourselves, God and other people will lift us up. And that's the way I want to be lifted up, in the eyes of others and God, not in my own eyes. I'm tired of having penalty flags thrown and calling back the things that I think I did that were great. I'd rather let those great things that I do, whatever they may be, I'd rather let someone else notice it. I don't need to pat myself on the back. I want to humble myself, live a life of humility, and then others and God will actually lift me up. And I'll always give the glory back to God. Okay, so you got it. If you want to be, here's a paradox. It's going against the grain. Would you like to be great? Then serve others. And it's the road to greatness. God bless you. I hope this is helpful. We'll talk to you next week.